Welcome to My Morning Cup, a podcast produced by Costa Media Advisors and brought to you by the generous support of the Tennessee Valley Authority. To learn more about TVA's impact on our community, follow TVA on Instagram at TVA and on Twitter X at TVA News. My Morning Cup, where we have interesting conversations with genuine people. I'm Mike Costa, your host. My guest this week is Marj Flemming. Marj's career brought her to Chattanooga in 1987, and she's seen a lot of positive change in the scenic city in that time. Marj, welcome to My Morning Cup. Before we talk about your desire to be a country western singer, let me ask, what's in your morning cup?
Well, my morning cup is the same every morning. I'm a little bit boring first thing in the morning because it takes me a little bit to get awake. So I have 1/2 a cup of coffee with half and half and a teaspoon of sugar, and that gets me revved up and off I go.
Because it has a little coffee in there, does that qualify as coffee?
Yeah, that qualifies, sure.
1/2 a cup of coffee, half and half, and sugar.
You bet.
Yeah. But, that's the beauty of a morning routine. You have the stuff that wakes you up.
Yeah, well, some days it's nice to have just a little piece of a routine before you start on the day because the day can sort of slam you from different directions.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. I've known you a while, but I have not known a lot of your story, and that's my fault. And I'm excited that we can talk about it today because I find it really intriguing. I found out the other day that you're from Iowa. See, I never knew you were from Iowa because you've been in Chattanooga since, 1987?
Right.
And I consider you a Chattanoogan. So you grew up in Iowa?
I'm a born and bred Hawkeye fan.
Oh, a Hawkeye fan.
You bet.
Yeah, they played Tennessee in a bowl game this year.
I could only watch a little bit of that game. It was awful.
Oh, I thought it was one of the best games.
Depending on who you're rooting for.
Exactly.
But, Hawkeyes all the way.
Yeah. Well, I've always admired the Hawkeyes. They've had a couple good coaches, and they have a lot of stability. So you grew up in a small town in Iowa. Tell us about that. You grew up on a farm?
Well, I was born in northeastern Iowa in a town called Nashua, which is like Nashua, New Hampshire. Mm-hmm. And my parents lived on a farm. So for the first 7.5 years, that's what we did. We did farming, and there were 4 of us children. And when I say we did farming, I mean my younger 2 brothers, they didn't do farming, but the 2 older girls, they did. They did a lot of it.
So what were your chores?
Well, one of mine was to dress the chickens for Sunday dinner. And so...
No, wait a second. Address them?
Well, dress them like,
guys, we're going to dinner.
Well, that's what we call it. You had to pluck the chickens.
Oh, wow.
And so I got to dip them in the boiling water and pull them out.
They were already dead.
They were dead. My dad would take care of that. And then I would dip them in the boiling water, and then I would pluck the chickens. And then I would go in, and my sister would cut them up, and my mother would fry them up. Every Sunday. It was the same every Sunday. So that was one of the things. The part of that I really hated was I also had to gather eggs.
Yeah.
And if anybody in this audience has ever had to gather eggs, that's just not fun because those chickens peck at you when you reach for the eggs.
Well, I can imagine you're taking something that's theirs.
Yeah, yeah. And by the time I was 6, I actually drove a tractor in the field for my dad.
When did you start doing chores?
Oh, gosh. When you live on a farm, you start pretty early. I would say we started having some responsibilities at about 3.5 or 4.
Oh, wow.
But not that heavy duty kind of responsibility, but responsibilities in the house because my mother would also go out and help my dad in the fields and on the farm and milk the cows and things like that. So, you always had, as early as I can remember, we had responsibilities. And as I've aged, I recognize what a great thing that was.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. What did that teach you, instill in you?
Oh, gosh. Well, first of all, hard work.
Yeah. We
never backed away from hard work. But also just the lesson of you grow the food you put on the table. Mm-hmm. And, I know people who say, well, I couldn't cut up a chicken if I had to. And I think you could if you were hungry.
If you had to, you sure could.
Yeah. But anyway, after I was 7.5, we moved to a small town in northwestern Iowa. My parents gave up the farm, and they both got jobs there. So we lived like pretty much everybody else. My mother worked part-time, and my dad had a full-time job.
And what was the name of that town?
Oh, well, that town was Correctionville.
Correctionville.
That's kind of a wonky name.
Was that indicative of the main industry in the town?
No. What happened was in Iowa, everything has straight lines. It's landlocked.
Yeah.
So everything has straight lines. And so every town, big or small, and ours was a town of about 1,000, you have a main street, and you call it Main Street.
Makes sense.
Yeah. You can't go to a town in Iowa that doesn't have a main street called Main Street. So what happened in our town was the engineers started on the south end of town to build Main Street, and another group of engineers started on the north end of town to build Main Street. And when they got together, they didn't meet. So they had to put in a correction line. So it's about a third of a block of what we would call a city block. It's a correction line. So you drive from the south toward the north, and you turn left and go a third of a block, and you turn right and go the rest of the way on Main Street. So that's why they called it Correctionville. And I just want you to know, Mike, that I've been teased about this all my life.
I can imagine.
But it was the best life because it was a town of 1,000 people.
Yeah.
And everybody knew everybody. And it was one of those towns where if you did anything wrong, which by the way, I didn't, but if you did, somebody called your mother or your father. And by the time you made it home, you were already in trouble.
Yeah. It literally was a different time for the world.
It was. Yeah. And, in Iowa, we hear people joke all the time about having to walk, 2 miles to school uphill and then having to walk home from school 2 miles uphill. And I think we didn't have that. So I have a lot of people ask me about that. And because it was a different time, we walked 3/4 of a mile to school and 3/4 of a mile home from school. And it didn't matter whether there was ice or snow or rain. There was not a line of mama's cars. If you're going to get to school, that's how you get to school. And the boys eventually got bikes, stuff like that. So anyway, it was a great town with a real strange name.
And you had how many siblings growing up?
Oh, I have 2 younger brothers and an older sister.
Okay. So you were not in the middle, but the second girl.
Yeah.
I bet a lot of responsibility fell on you and your sister if you had younger brothers.
Oh, it did.
Yeah.
It still does. Just so you know.
I bet. Well, I'm curious. You're growing up in small town Iowa, and you want to be a country and western singer. Who were you wanting to emulate?
No one.
No one?
No one. We started square dancing. That was one of the things that you did in a town. You had Saturday night square dance. Everybody went to town, and I got hooked on that music.
Yeah.
I really did. And so I square danced until I left home to go to school. And we also listened to the radio. And so, you don't have all the stations you have now, right. And you don't have all the news you have now. So you listen to in the morning, you'd listen to the 6:00 farm report, how much hogs were selling for and all that stuff. And then they'd go right into country music. And so that's what I heard before school every morning.
Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys and some of that Texas swing.
And Patsy Cline.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, some of that. And I just liked country music, and I still do.
Yeah.
I go to live performances all the time because I like country music. It tells a story.
Oh, yeah. Some of the best writing. What is it that's saying about country music? 3 bars and 3 chords and the truth? Something like that.
Yeah, that's just about right. Yeah, so what happened was, they ask you what you want to be. And I was a vocalist in school, and I wanted to be a country singer. And my dad just took me aside and he goes, we don't have much call for that in this town.
As only Dad could.
I never knew I could go out of town.
Yeah.
When you grow up and you have this kind of, what you look back on as sort of an idyllic life, you go, well, I never planned to leave this town.
Yeah.
And he goes, well, you just can't do the things you want to do, Marge, in this town. Oh my, that was a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah.
A real eye-opener. Yeah.
What did it tell you?
Well, at the time, it didn't tell me what it probably should have, but it scared me a little bit because I was safe there. We were all safe there. And we didn't think about being safe. We just didn't think about being unsafe.
Yeah, because it never crossed your mind. But all of a sudden he says, you're not going to be able to pursue that in this town. And your mind's going, okay, I'm going to have to leave my safe place.
Yeah. And so, the young people I know now, they kind of, if they're going to go to college, for example, they kind of know that at a fairly young age.
Mm-hmm.
I never knew that till I was done being a junior in high school. It never occurred to me that I was going to do more in school because I just didn't kind of know about that.
Didn't really have a reason to, did you?
No.
Yeah.
I didn't.
So what was the light bulb that went off that you said, you know what, college is for me and I need to pursue? And what did you want to pursue?
Our grandparents did that for us.
Uh-huh.
They talked to us about that and told us that they expected us to get more education. And so my grandfather also agreed to pay for your first year.
Oh.
And we didn't have a good concept of money. My parents were fine. I mean, we lived like everybody else, but they didn't have money for college. That's why we never talked about college. And so I looked around for a college that I thought somebody might be able to help me with for a year.
Yeah.
And so I picked a college that was 1 year. It was a business school. And I went there with no idea of what I wanted to be or do. But that's my year. And then I could figure it out after that.
And a 1-year business school, was that focused on business administration and some of those skills at that time?
It was. And they had 4 different ways you could go. And I selected the secretarial way because that was the year. If you took 2 years, you could go a different way. But I took the year and started my career as a secretary.
Oh, wow. So what was your first job then?
My first job was at Manpower. And, Manpower provides temporary help and so on. And I was supposed to put out the day laborers. And so someone would call and say, I need 2 people to shovel dirt or dig a cemetery plot or whatever. And so I would go to this counter where we had people sitting and waiting to work that day. And I would pick who had done that before or who I knew or who was sober that day.
Yeah.
And send them out on a job. That was my first job.
Was this in Correctionville?
This was in Sioux City.
So you moved to the big city.
I moved to the big city to go to that 1 year of school.
What kind of change was that for you to go from living in small town Iowa to a much bigger city?
Well, it was a huge change. First of all, they had 12 dorm rooms for that school. And so I was in a dorm room with somebody that wasn't my family.
Yeah.
And, all young people have to adjust to that in some way. So I had that. And it was a big adjustment because that's where you start to learn the fear. I don't know how to go further than 4 blocks. I don't know this. And I would get a ride from Correctionville into Sioux City on Monday, and then I'd get a ride back to Correctionville on Friday night. And then I worked for this woman doing ironing and house cleaning on the weekend to help, pay for my education. And so it was a light bulb around the real world.
Yeah.
So, I can learn some new things. I can live on my own without my parents and my siblings.
Build your confidence.
Yeah. And then I can come home and work and I can earn some money that gives me a little bit of freedom that wasn't from my grandfather writing that check for that year.
How far was Sioux City from Correctionville?
32 miles.
Ah, I bet it seemed like 150 at the time.
It did. Yeah. It did. And, I didn't have a car, so I had to depend on friends who came and went that direction. So, that was a big leap for me. And that's how I started to learn both about business and about the world.
So how long did you do Manpower and what comes next? How did things progress
then I got married.
Oh, you got married?
Yeah, I was 19 when I got married. And I married my childhood sweetheart. He lived next door to me growing up in Correctionville.
Yeah.
And
it's almost the way the script was written. You're in the small town Iowa and everyone, almost like Trumanville.
Well, it is so much like it that I have to tell you, each of my siblings married a hometown person that we all lived within about 6 blocks of each other. And it's like my siblings, their spouses are my half siblings because we know them so well.
Grew up together.
Yeah, absolutely. So I got married and then I got pregnant.
Okay.
And I had a baby. And then 11 months later, I had 2 babies.
So
I
you
had 3 babies by the time I was 21.
And all of them under 2?
All of them under 1.
Oh, goodness gracious.
Yeah. So that was the next step for me.
That's a pretty big step.
Yeah. But let me tell you just a little story about Manpower.
Sure.
These day laborers oftentimes came in trying to sober up. And that was a real education for me, of course.
Yeah, I bet you didn't see a lot of that on the farm or in Correctionville.
Not a lot. We knew who the town drunks were,
Yeah.
but you don't see a lot of that. You're not exposed to it like up close and personal. And I was dealing with these people every day. And I was young and naive and evidently nice and friendly. And so when I was pregnant with my daughter, they were these guys. They were all men. They were just, when are you going to have that baby and all that kind of stuff. And when I left the job at Manpower to have my child, they had pooled their money. Now, bear in mind that at the time, day laborers made $1.25 an hour. They pooled their money and bought me a lovely baby bed. And that was their gift to me.
What a nice thing.
For being nice to them.
Yeah.
So, that was another huge lesson.
Yeah.
About how you meet these people who are all brand new experiences for you because they're hungover, and some of them aren't even hungover yet. And you treat them with some dignity, and what happens? So that's the story I kind of wanted to tell you.
Well, that's an important one because the way you treat people is important, and everyone deserves dignity, and everyone deserves empathy too.
Yeah. So that was interesting. So then I had all these kids.
Yeah. Well, so you got 3 under the age of 1, and you're 25 years old.
Well, I was 21.
Oh, geez, Pete.
Yeah. And then we moved from Iowa, my husband and I. He moved 5 weeks after they were born. He moved to California. So when he got a job in California, then I picked up those 3 kids. And by then, the twins were 5 months old.
Yeah.
And I took all of them on an airplane to California. Now, there's an eye-opener.
Oh, I bet. I got to, I guess, ask you or get this right in my mind. You grew up in a small town like this where everyone basically stays.
Yeah.
And your husband takes a job in California. Mm-hmm. What got into him?
Well, I'm going to see if I can nuance this for you just a little bit. My parents lived 5 blocks north of us. His parents lived 5 blocks south of us.
Oh.
So it was kind of like one of them plugged in your coffee pot in the morning before you got up, and one of them locked your doors when you were tucked in at night. And we didn't like that.
Yeah, I understand that.
But I think we overdid it because we moved 3,000 miles away.
We're in California.
We moved to San Jose.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So you get to California, you got 3 kids, your husband has a new job. What are you doing?
Well, I take care of the 3 kids.
Oh, obviously, yeah.
And when they were almost 4, I started to work through Manpower.
Oh, so you still got the relationship there.
Yeah, and so I did some temporary jobs, and then eventually I was offered a job by GE, and I was offered a job by PG&E, which is Pacific Gas and Electric, and I chose a job with General Electric.
Oh, good call.
Yeah, and so I started building my career, and I spent probably maybe 4 years as a secretary, and then I started getting noticed. Mm-hmm. But, I was still reluctant because I really do have this small town thing. And so it didn't occur to me, for example, to put in for promotional jobs because I had this steady job. But I started getting noticed, and so I very quickly became a supervisor and then a manager and so on. So I stayed with General Electric.
About what year was this?
Oh, no, you're not going to age me.
No, I'm only asking that because you went to business school to learn secretarial training, and your introduction to GE was through the secretarial aspect of the job. And it's changed so much today that I'm sure some of our listeners are going, well, I would never do that. I mean,
right.
And I'm trying to get it to, you've got to have a foot in the door. You got to get an introduction. You got to get in and prove yourself.
Yeah, it was probably around 1969. Mm-hmm. So then I started moving up through GE and really had a wonderful career at GE.
What was that first move that got you out of being a secretary and where you first got noticed and they said, okay, we think you would do well here?
Well, logic would probably tell you that I was the supervisor of the word processing center. And then I I got involved in giving some presentations. I had a mentor at GE, and he gave me an opportunity to give some presentations, what we now call analytics, about how much work we were putting out and how much was coming in and so on. And so then I became the manager of a technical training organization, and a great fun. And when you think these days about all of us having computers on our desks and so on, I worked in the nuclear engineering group. And my job in that training role was to put a personal computer on every engineer's desk and train him or her, mainly hims in those days, how to use it.
I bet there was a lot of resistance.
None of them wanted it. Oh, they were so unhappy. They were so unhappy. And you look at it today and you just have to laugh at those times, but they did not want that.
Yeah, you take it for granted today, but I could see that. Why do I need that?
Well, we had a whole computer center. You could just ask somebody to get you this and they'd get you this.
Yeah.
You make the request is filled. So anyway, I got to work with all the nuclear engineers and get them all to learn to accept the computers. And I did that. And it was a more than full-time job. Many times you went home at 2 or 3 in the morning because you were having to prepare lesson plans that they could not just understand, but finally agree to try. I mean, it was a real challenge and it was a really pivotal time in my career. But when I was done with that, I was tired.
Yeah.
And so I really kind of wanted to move to the South, which was another goal of mine throughout most of my life. And I have no idea why.
Was the GE, the 19 years of GE, all in San Jose?
Yes.
Because I've heard you say before you had a desire to move to the South in Tennessee. Does that trace back to your love of country and Western music to just kind of be closer to that culture? Or?
It might. It probably does in some way. I never thought of it with that relationship, but it probably does.
Yeah.
And so I started looking for another job. And there wasn't going to be another opportunity for me at GE Nuclear because the people that had I had a senior job, but the people that had the executive jobs, they were all PhDs.
Yeah.
And engineers. I was never going to be that. I don't have that kind of mind. You know, I tend to like people and I tend to marry engineers. So they do the technical stuff and I do the people stuff.
Yeah. And it's a good combination.
It is.
So you decide you want to move to Tennessee.
No, I decide I want to move to the South.
Or to the South.
And I start looking for opportunities in the South.
Now, your husband's working as what right now?
My husband was working at GE and he was a nuclear physicist.
Okay.
And he was in San Jose. But he was 20 years older than me.
Okay.
This was my second husband. And so he was prepared to live wherever I wanted to live because he was in such a position at that time that he was doing mainly consulting for nuclear power plants. Okay.
So it gave you the flexibility to be able to pursue your career. A lot of folks we talk to, I'm just going to say it as sexist as it sounds. A lot of times the woman sacrifices her career for the man's career.
Yes, that's right. My husband did not do that. I moved here and he stayed there for about 6 months to wrap up our home and his job. And he retired and moved here and then became a consultant for TVA.
So you're in San Jose, you're saying, gosh, I sure would like to live in the South. I got this background, the GE nuclear end. What would make sense? And up pops some TVA opportunities.
Yeah. And the person who mentored me at GE was already consulting at TVA. So he was putting out the word for me.
Good.
And that was helpful.
Well, and that's an important point too. You've got a mentor or people you trust, and that's the networking that I don't think people appreciate enough, that it's the people who are going to be your advocate when you're not in the room.
That's right. And he was.
Yeah. He
absolutely was. And so he talked to people at TVA, and I got a couple of interviews at TVA and got an offer at TVA. And I owe a lot of that to his connections.
Yeah. And that's, I think, 1987 you got here?
1987, I moved here and went to work for TVA.
So in 1987, you're going to work for TVA and you've got to move to Chattanooga, Tennessee. And Chattanooga, Tennessee does not have the reputation at that time that it has now. It was kind of a sad city, was it not?
It was. It was. That was back just when people were starting to think that it really was too dirty. It needed to be cleaned up environmentally.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was kind of a sad city. There was one hotel for me to stay at. I mean, I could have stayed at the Reed House. They didn't put us up at the Reed House then, but that one that has the City Cafe down by the convention center. And, the town was suffering the effects of the dirty air and all of that.
Yeah, and it had a lot of manufacturing leave it. And it was a depressing time. And so you moved here from California, which was obviously dynamic through the 80s.
It was, but the difference was that the bad air quality in California was starting to affect how I breathe because you had all the traffic.
Yeah.
And so you are stuck in exhaust for a long time, twice a day. And it really was starting to affect how I breathe. So when I came here, that wasn't something I noticed because my breathing wasn't any worse here than it was there, but I wasn't stuck in my car 2 hours a day commuting.
Yeah, we complain when we're stuck 7 minutes in our car.
We do. I've been here long enough. I complain when I'm stuck 7 minutes. Yeah,
absolutely. So what was the job at TVA?
Well, I was in nuclear power at TVA, and I went into human resources, and then I became a senior staff manager, which was a little bit not like a media job, but a little bit like a media job. I worked for the guy who headed up nuclear power at TVA, and my job was, as he went around and did his job, I was feeding him the facts for where he was and what he was supposed to be talking about. And so that's what I did at TVA. I was part of human resources when I first started, and in about a year, I went into his staff manager.
You were kind of like his producer.
Yeah.
You're giving him his script and saying, okay, we're in Memphis today.
Yeah, that's right.
This is the mayor.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. And I enjoyed that. But, I really always liked working for engineers because they are so logical. And sometimes they're stubborn, but that outweighs the value they bring to the logical side of things. It was just a lot of my career spent with nuclear engineers.
Wow. And how long were you with TVA before you decided to start your own business?
I was with TVA for 3 years, which wasn't long, but I decided that I'd had by that time private sector and public sector experience. And I thought I would volunteer at a nonprofit, and then I'd have the whole realm, public, private, and nonprofit. And I should be able to address, I started my business as a management business. And then I looked around the country and thought, you know what we're missing really is leadership. Mm-hmm. And so after about 2 years as a management company, I changed my entire focus to leadership.
Is that a curriculum that you built yourself?
Yes, it is.
So you didn't sign on to a franchise or anything like that?
No, I had the American Management Association catalog, and I took that and took all their class titles, and then threw away the catalog. And I developed a training curriculum for every one of those titles. Well, then I realized, that's not going to do me any good if I don't get out there and do something with it. And so when I looked at it, I thought, no, this would be very easy to slide under and include leadership. And so that's how I started it.
Was it unusual at that time? It was probably, 1990, 91?
1990.
Was it unusual for a female to get into leadership consulting at that point?
Well, I don't think there was leadership consulting at that point, Mike. I had to be careful how I marketed it because if most people, if they send something out for bid or they're willing to talk to you, they would talk to you about management training. Mm-hmm. And so what I would do is, that was acceptable to me. But then when I would do things like write down which courses, I would do an evaluation, and write down which courses or the types of training I thought they needed, I would always put that in.
Yeah.
And so it was, even though I changed my focus, changing it for other people was in the evolution.
So it kind of morphed into that as you put it in there. And as you started your business and you have no customers.
Right.
How did you use your network? How did you use those years of experience to get some money going?
Well, a couple of ways. One is I found a couple of products that I liked. You and I had talked once upon a time about the disc product. And there also was LIFO, both of those. And so I took some of my money and went and got certified on both of those. Well, when you do that, you meet a lot of people.
Yes, you do.
And they don't all live in Chattanooga.
Yeah.
And so you start networking in a different way. I wanted to do as much work as I could in this area. So I would pick their brain on how they did it all. And then, I used to have a business card that called me a fearless leader, which I kind of am.
Well,
and so I'll go in anywhere.
Being in Rotary with you and serving on the membership committee, I know fearless leader, and I know another name that Kurt calls you, the Velvet Hammer.
yeah, but I don't put that one on my business card.
But it could go on there.
Yeah, and so when you start a business, I think you need to step up first thing and say, I've got to be brave about this because this is how I'm going to earn my living. This is going to be the rest of my career. And it was. And so, I go in and I talk to them about where I see needs in their type of the world. And having the utility behind me was helpful too, because people respect utilities.
Oh, yeah.
We all have to rely on them.
Yeah.
So if you've worked in a utility, and I worked for Pacific Gas and Electric, I used all of that in my paperwork. And when you've got that kind of experience, people will talk to you because they think you know something.
Yeah, well, if a big company like that, or your association with TVA, anything like that, it's branding you as they think I'm good enough. You said something earlier about starting your business. You got to be brave enough. And I think that's something that's underrated in terms of when people approach starting a business. It takes a lot of gumption, not just to start it, but that first day when you're sitting in your office or wherever you're working out of yourself.
Yeah.
That phone ain't picking up itself.
That's right. That's right. And you have to talk to people. And, the thing I learned early on, and I'm not sure where I got it, but the thing I learned early on was, what I think is important to me, but what you think is more important to me.
Yeah.
Because I'm a people person, what you think has to be important to me.
Yeah.
So I learned to listen. I learned how to ask questions. I learned how to approach people and, stay up on things that are important so that you're interesting as well. And if you can do those kinds of things, then the networking part is easy. I'm not really good at asking for the job, but I'm really good at laying out why I'm qualified to do the job.
Yeah, to where you're leading them to the yes.
One of the things when I talk to people about leadership is lots of people think of leadership as power. I don't see that. I think of leadership as influence. Forget the power.
Yeah.
Have the influence, but earn it.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. Leadership's not about having the power over people or the process. You have an influence, but, and it's a big term nowadays, but it really is servant leadership. You're working for the people who work for you.
Yeah, you are. Yeah. And the sooner you can learn that, life in general is much better off.
Very true. Very true. I want to switch gears a little bit. You started your consulting business in 1990 and it's still going today. So 34 years, very successful. But you saw a lot of change in Chattanooga at that time. And I want to get to that, but also my knowledge of you and what I know about you is more related to community service and your presence in the community. And I want to talk about the importance of that a bit and some of the things you've done. So you move here, you're at TVA for 3 years, you decide to launch your business here, and you see the town's changing. What was your impetus to get involved?
Well, first of all, when I moved here from California, I didn't even know there were nonprofit organizations. I didn't know there was community service. It just wasn't part of my life. My life was a big business. So when I started my own business in 1990, I was sitting at my desk a lot, doing a lot of writing of curriculum. And I thought, I need to get out in the community a little bit because I'm not around any people. And so I applied for a part-time job at the Room in the Inn, Chattanooga Room in the Inn. And so I became the volunteer coordinator at the Room in the Inn, and it's supposed to be like a 6-hour job a week. Well, it turned into a 60-hour job a week, so I couldn't do that for long. but I got the taste of serving other people. And so I went from doing that to go back to my business full time once the writing was done. And I looked for a place where I could volunteer because I needed that in my life. My children were raised, just my husband and me and our dog, and I needed more. And so a friend of mine talked to me about signal centers. And I went to signal centers and took a tour. And I walked down, I don't know if you've ever been to signal centers, but they work with children with disabilities and adults with disabilities, and they have a school for some of the grades, and then they have children with disabilities mixed in with children who don't have disabilities. But I walked down the hall at signal centers, and I saw a little wheelchair that was about not quite 2 feet tall. I never realized that children had such a disability that they needed a wheelchair.
Mm-hmm.
I never realized that they had those crutches and walkers that were just miniature things.
Yeah.
And, you just start to cry.
That's kind of an aha moment, wasn't it?
A big one. So I met with Donna McConnico and said, I'd like to do something here. And she said, what is your passion about helping people? I think my passion is I'm looking at these little wheelchairs and I'm looking at these little walkers, and I don't have one of those people in my life.
Yeah.
I want to help those people in my life. I'm still at signal centers.
Yeah.
I'm still doing a lot at signal centers. And that got me started in that. But then there's also things like the arts.
Yeah.
And things like that. And I have a son who's an artist. And I think a bit like an artist, but, I can't get it from my brain to my hand. So I have no artistic ability other than to recognize it. And so I've worked with the Mid-South Sculpture Alliance and did a lot of work with them on a volunteer basis and some work with them on a staff basis. And so I just look around for what's going to enrich my life in yet another way, and I get involved because I have like a one-person business. How else am I going to be surrounded by people?
Yeah.
And I want to be surrounded by people. I'm way too social to do otherwise.
And I can identify with that. I spent my entire career working in the broadcast industry, working with people and being out in the public. And I start to work for myself, and I'm at home in an office by myself. And boy, that's tough.
Yeah, it can get lonely.
Yeah. The importance of, particularly when you're working in a community and not getting on a plane and flying to wherever the job is or, that kind of, but the importance, if you're making your career in the community, I can't emphasize how important it is to be involved with the community, because not just the fulfilling aspect of helping people, but the selfish aspect, and I call it selfish, of the contacts you make, the networking that you make. I think it's invaluable.
One of the things I did years ago, 31 years ago, which I was just reminded of last night, is I, with 6 other women, started the Women's Leadership Institute in Chattanooga. And that has, first of all, it's allowed me to do my leadership thing, but it also has connected me with so many other people that can make a difference in Chattanooga.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, there's something very exciting about having a life like that, where you can just connect with those people. And
it snowballs too. Because someone you connect with here might also be over there, and you make other connections with that. At least that's what I've found.
That's what I found too.
I also know you have a love of travel. Growing up in Iowa, in this little confined area.
Yeah.
And so tell me about your travel in the Southern Hemisphere.
Oh, well, my husband and I took an around-the-world tour in the Southern Hemisphere. It was sponsored by the University of Kansas, which is where he went to school. And we went to these places and did these things that most people don't ever go to. Like we went to the Seychelles. We went to Galapagos. A lot of people go to Galapagos. We went to Brazil. We went to the opera in Brazil. It was one of those deals where it's an educational trip. And so on our trip, we had a geologist, an ornithologist, the man who started the Skeptic Society. Now, there was an interesting guy.
I bet.
And, we went and watched people who carve masks and things like that. And they live in little huts, and we would sit in those little huts. And so we just went everywhere. We were in Africa. Oh, gosh, Nepal.
What an eye-opener, huh?
That really was. And we went there. There was a recession. And one of the surprising things was Nepal, which is an interesting place culturally to go. But tourism had come to a screeching halt, except that our thing, for whatever reason, didn't. And those people were so used to begging. And, when I think now about the COVID virus, they would get up to within 3 inches of your nose and beg for money. And the problem was they really needed the money because there was no tourism there at the time. But anyway, we did all of those. We slept in huts.
How long was that trip?
That trip was about 4 weeks.
Wow. What an experience.
Yeah. We boated down the Amazon in a dugout kind of canoe. And that was so enriching. I just can't believe how enriching it was. It was a very nice trip. And we did a lot of other traveling, but we never went the normal places because my husband was in the Navy in World War II. And so he didn't like islands because he spent his life on those islands.
I could understand that.
Yeah. So I haven't had a Hawaii vacation yet,
Well, we have that in common. I haven't either.
Well,
I want to get to a couple other things before we run out of time. I know you've written a couple books and started a couple other businesses. Talk about those a little bit.
Oh, I started, when I got into leadership, the areas that I was addressing as a leader, I thought I had it sort of covered. And one day I woke up literally and said, wait a minute, there's no leadership research on sustainable health. And so I can read a lot on health and so on, but I need to be able to walk my talk. That's always been part of my deal. And so I bought a fitness business, and it would be now considered the precursor to the bar, that's real popular now. It was called Calinetics, and it was a woman from Savannah who started it, and it was that kind of training. It was all strengthening training and core training. And so I thought I was going to hire somebody to run that. Well, I couldn't find the right person to do that, so I ran that for 12 years. And I loved that. And then I started a gift basket business because that does feed some of my creative side. I ran that for about 5-6 years. And that was fun too. And I have a lot of energy. And
obviously.
It needs to be channeled in the right ways. So, you've heard a lot now about me today. You know how I channel it. And I closed the fitness business eventually, and I closed the gift basket business. But I haven't been able to close the leadership business. It's just too close to my heart.
Well, one of the things you told me earlier is you're working hard on being semi-retired.
I am. I'm not very successful at it, but, every once in a while you have to have a little failure in your life just to keep you honest.
Well, you've been such a fabulous contributor to the community and just your attitude about it. And I think the lessons from that, it's so important for people to get involved in their community because it's not only good for your community, it's good for you and it's good for your business.
It is.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I get to my last question, though, I do want to remind our listeners who makes all of this possible. And I want to say thank you to the Tennessee Valley Authority for sponsoring My Morning Cup. Follow TVA on social media to learn more about its multifaceted mission of service and visit TVA.com/do good here to explore exciting TVA career opportunities. They didn't have a website then when you got the job with TVA. Actually, they probably did at that point.
I don't think so.
No? I can't even remember when people started using the web for looking for jobs. I guess it was the late 90s.
Yeah. At least mid-90s.
Yeah. We had to go the old-fashioned way of looking at the classifieds or the trades.
Yeah.
Wait each week for whatever trade magazine and go, hey, man, that looks of interest there.
Yeah. Read the newspaper.
Read the newspaper. Well, Marj, this has been great, and I want to ask you my standard last question. And I think you're going to have an interesting answer to this. What would you tell your 25-year-old self is important for a happy life?
Oh, Mike, were you not listening to me where I was at 25? I had 3 kids who were 3.5 years old when I was 25. If somebody gave me advice, I didn't have time to listen to it.
No, your hands were full, weren't they?
They were. What I would tell my 25-year-old is, it'll all be fine.
Yeah.
It'll all be fine. And I don't think I have anything more than that because, you're under a lot of stress when you're raising kids. And I had, as we've discussed, all that energy to burn. If somebody could have rubbed my back and said, it'll all be fine, I might let go of something, but I don't know what it would have been.
And it's so true, because, and I'll look back at myself and I spent a lot of time worrying about what's to come. Mm-hmm. And you're just borrowing tomorrow's problems for today, and you can't change the past. So, and you're right, it will all be fine. 99% of the things that we worry so much about don't happen.
It's so true.
But we've spent all this time going, oh, what if this?
Yeah.
And I think that's great advice. And you've got a lot to teach people, Marj. And you want to give a plug for your company?
No.
Oh, come on.
I'm still doing a lot of coaching.
Yeah.
And that does make me happy because it does help other people.
Yeah.
Oftentimes women become more than they thought they could today and tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so I'll just give a plug for coaching.
That's a great one. And another point that's very important. And I think focusing on female and minority entrepreneurs and leadership training is very important.
Yeah.
Well, I've really enjoyed this discussion today.
So have I, and I can't wait to interview you one day.
Oh, I look forward to it. Thank you, Marj. Thanks for listening to My Morning Cup, a podcast by Costa Media Advisors. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. I release a new episode each week, so be sure to subscribe on Spotify, Apple, Google, or wherever you listen to podcasts.